Hello and welcome to another Miss Jody's Musical Minutes. I'm your host, Miss Jody. We are getting to the end of all the markings that I wanted to tell you about on a piece of sheet music. But one thing that I want to cover before we end all these lessons is an important set of markings so that we all know where we are when we are rehearsing a piece of music. Just like if you were going to attend a meeting with a large amount of people, you would have a meeting agenda. This would keep everybody on track and keep everybody knowing where we are in the meeting's plan. In rehearsal, we can't just go from the top of the piece of music to the bottom of the piece of music and not be able to stop in the middle somewhere. So we have markings that help us to know where we are, just like that meeting agenda. All right, I wanted to thank you all for being here today. I have some agendas I'm going to pass around. You can just take one and pass it. I really appreciate your time today. We sure do have a lot to cover. And I know that there are some of you that can't stay for the full meeting, so if you'll look, there's section 3 is what we're going to start with. It's on page 2. And we're going to start with the biggest topic, which is subsection B. So since some people can't stay, let's get to the heart of that discussion right away. So just like in a meeting agenda, where you would see sections 1, 2, and 3 with maybe subsets A, B, and C under each one, we have similar markings, and those are called measure numbers. These are just a way to number each and every measure that we have so that we can refer back to whatever measure we want to go to. But some pieces don't contain each measure number. Some contain what are called rehearsal letters or rehearsal numbers. Now, these rehearsal letters, if they're used correctly, they are positioned in places that are significant changes or sections in the music that we may want to rehearse individually. Just like the letters, the numbers are often the measure numbers, but sometimes they are just section numbers. They also refer to specific places in our music that have a change in the melody or a change in what's going on in the music itself. Okay, so we're to the part of our meeting where we're going to hear from Alicia with her solo report, and then after she's had some time to speak, then we're going to hear from the 2D section, which is the whole curriculum committee. So if we're ready to do that, Alicia, you can take the floor.
Okay.
Just like in a meeting, sometimes we hear from others in the room that have to make a report to the group. We sometimes just hear from one individual player, and in our music, we may see notes in front of us, but it may indicate the word solo, which means just one player. After a while, we will see the word 2D, so that we know the rest of the section can join back in and the solo has ended. There is also a word that we see if we see notes that are stacked on top of each other. There's a lot of us instruments that can only play one note at a time. So when we see double stacked notes, we know that there has to be something different going on because we can't play more than one note at a time. So for example, in the flute section, if we have 2 notes on top of each other, we know that this is called a divisi part. And that means that some of our players in that section will play the top notes only, and some will play the bottom notes only. Now there are some instruments that can read more than one note at a time, and those would be the strings, a whole bunch of percussion instruments, the harp, and the piano. But for the rest of us, if we see more than one note stacked on top of each other, we know something's up. Now, two other markings that I want to share with you are markings that are kind of along the lines of being included in the roadmap, but they also give us certain places to refer to if we need to stop at different sections. The first one is called a fermata. A fermata indicates that we will stop on that particular note that it is written above, and we'll hold that note for an extended amount of time, longer than the duration originally indicates by what kind of note it is. The conductor will cut us off when it's time for that note to end, and that's a place where we can stop and regroup. There's also a marking called a caesura. We often refer to it as railroad tracks because we have to stop and look and see what the conductor wants to do. It's just a momentary pause in the music, but we all have to stop together and look at the conductor and then be told when to move on to the rest of the music. Okay, and yeah, Mr. Richards, I'm not sure why you're here today. I don't see any business on here that has to do with you, but you know, if you're here just gonna hang out and, you know, if you want to take notes or something, that'll be good. Thank you anyhow for showing up. In larger works, we have different movements within those big works of music, like a symphony. And sometimes in the smaller sections, some people will not need to play at all. In your music, you would see the word tacit. This means you do not have any music to play in that section. It helps us to know if we're tacit or if we're just missing a page of music and should ask about it. So this helps us to know that we have no music to play in that section, and we will resume playing in the next section. One more little helpful tidbit that we see in our music sometimes are these little tiny notes that are called cues. These cues indicate what is happening while we might be having a really long extended resting time, a time where we don't have any notes to play, but other people do. So they might write in really small notes, they might show us what somebody else is playing, like a soloist or the main melody that's happening, and tell us who is playing so that we will feel comfortable and reassured as to where we're supposed to be in the music. Sometimes it's hard to rest for long periods of time and know exactly when to come back in. These cues help us to keep on track and know exactly where everybody is. So the next time you're in a meeting and you have a whole agenda in front of you, remember that in our music rehearsals, we have ways of knowing where we are in our whole agenda of rehearsing, and it keeps everybody on task. It also saves lots of time in rehearsal because we don't have to guess where everybody's starting. One of the other things that it helps with is younger groups. If you have a bunch of student musicians that are not very experienced, it really helps to tell them where we are as they're playing, because then they feel reassured to know that they're on track, even though they're not as experienced at hearing that yes, they are indeed in the right place. These are really helpful tools for us musicians as we prepare to play the whole piece for you in a performance. You may not hear these marks when it comes to actually listening to the piece being performed, but it really helps us to prepare our music and know where we are and be able to rehearse smaller sections that need extra work. Thanks for tuning in. you should feel pretty accomplished by now if you've watched all the episodes, because we have very few things left to talk about that's on our piece of sheet music. Tune in next time for our last episode of Miss Jody's Musical Minutes, and thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.